Okay, it is 9 o'clock. We are ready to start this meeting. Let's call the select board to order.
Roll. Yeah. Okay. Ms. Ackerman.
Present.
Ms. Bates.
Present.
Mr. Dane.
Present.
Ms. Escobedo.
Present.
And myself, Mr. Johnson, present.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Terry Ackerman, the select board chair this year. Welcome to the annual town meeting preview. And this is an annual Concord tradition. And due to the high transmission rates of COVID right now, we're conducting this meeting virtually. To everyone who is attending. And I ask that all select board members, staff, and presenters activate your video and mute your microphone at this time until it's time for your presentation. This meeting is being live broadcast by Minuteman Media Network and is available online. The meeting is also being recorded and will be available on the town's YouTube site. Let me just say that I'm very aware that the town is planning for 2 town meetings right now, and sometimes this can get confusing for all of us, especially the public that is not as involved as we are. So to be clear, today's event is for the annual town meeting only. Every year we hold this preview meeting, and annual town meeting is scheduled this year for May 1st, 2022 at 1 p.m. at the high school. But today's meeting is only to preview and get a very general overview of the items that we anticipate are going to be included in the annual town meeting warrant. The warrant opens today and it will close on February 2nd at 4 p.m. So at this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve the opening of the warrant today and the closing on February 2nd at 4 p.m.
Move to open the warrant for 2022 annual town meeting on January 8th, 2022 at 9 a.m. and close the warrant on February 2nd, 2022 at 4 p.m.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman.
Aye.
Ms. Bates.
Aye.
Mr. Dane.
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo.
Aye.
And myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Okay, thank you. So today we will be hearing previews from the town moderator, finance committee, interim town manager, personnel board, CPC, historical commission, planning board, Concord Public Schools, public works, and citizen petitioners. We have reserved 3 Q&A periods, and we appreciate your patience and ask you to wait until one of these Q&A periods if you have a question. Understanding we're just going to get a very brief overview. Everybody will have a very brief presentation. Some will be verbal and some will be slide decks. And finally, just briefly, I'd be remiss if I don't remind the public there is a special town meeting scheduled coming up in a few weeks on January 20th, a Thursday night at 7 p.m. at the high school to vote on the Concord Middle School building project. Please come to the special town meeting. There will also be a special town election on February 3rd. And please vote on the proposed Concord Middle School and a vacancy on the school committee. To say a few more words about both of our town meetings, I will now introduce our moderator, Carmen Reese.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, we have the special town meeting coming up on January 20th, the snow date of January 27, and that'll be followed by the special town election on February 3rd. And we have just the single issue at special town meeting and warrant with one article on it, the middle school building project. The hearing was held on December 16 on the special town meeting warrant. And anyone who has not watched that, I'd encourage you to watch the recording of it that's posted on the website. The Finance Committee has issued a report with recommendations of the Select Board and the Finance Committee contained therein. That's also posted on the website. I just want to say a brief word about the format for this special town meeting. As Terry mentioned, we're all concerned about the transmission of COVID right now. However, we do not have a Zoom or hybrid option for special town meetings. State law requires us to hold town meetings in person. So we will be holding this meeting in person. The weather is such this time of year that we'll be holding it indoors at Concord Carlisle High School. However, we will be using 3 areas at the high school. They're all well ventilated. That will allow people to have some increased physical distance. We will have some extra air cleaners on hand. Masks will be required at special town meeting. Both the Concord Board of Health and the schools inside their buildings are requiring masks, and we will enforce that same requirement. Many of us have become aware of a lot of information about the superiority of N95 masks, and I certainly myself will be wearing one of those rather than a different one. There will be presentations at this special town meeting. Speakers will be able to speak from the floor. We will be using that 1-minute limitation for speakers from the floor, and there will be closed captioning in the gymnasium. We do believe that these measures are sufficiently protective of public health to allow us to hold this meeting and to conduct it without undue risk to the participants. Transitioning to annual town meeting, we will be holding annual town meeting on May 1st. It also will be at the high school. Currently, we anticipate having that meeting indoors, which is easier logistically. We don't have to worry about rain, but we, that time of year, have the ability to move that meeting outside if there are reasons to do that. I know we have a number of citizen petitions that are likely to be submitted for the warrant, and I want to make clear to all of the citizen petitioners that both myself, the moderator, and the town clerk are available for any of your process questions, and please do reach out to us by email if you have a question. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And our first presenter for the annual town meeting now will be Christine Reynolds, the Finance Committee Chair.
Terrific. Thank you, Terry. Chris Carmody, can you bring up my slides? Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we can move to the first slide. So there's a couple of topics that FinCom will go through today. First, we'll talk about the status of budget guidelines and where we are with respect to our recommendations for budget for FY23. And then we have some warrant articles. So we have recurring articles. So for the past number of years, we've had an appropriation of around $1 million from free cash to offset property taxes. So that's been a recurring warrant article. So we're going to have that again. And then we also have an article with respect to meeting procedures that requires warrant articles that require funding to have a funding source. And so that's also a recurring set of articles. From a new perspective, we have one, and that's around the appropriation of funds from free cash to increase the middle school stabilization fund. Both the $1 million from free cash to offset property taxes and the $500,000 to increase the middle school stabilization fund were based on estimates that we had on free cash from maybe a month or so ago. And the latest update in the estimate for free cash is about $1 million lower. So although we still have the intent to bring these warrant articles forward, the amounts are really subject to some further discussion because of that decline in the estimated free cash. Next slide. So Parashar Patel is with us today as well. He's the vice chair of FinCom. He led the guideline process, and I'm going to ask him to take us through the next couple of slides here with respect to guidelines.
Thanks, Christine. So the guideline process this year was similar to what we did in previous years. So one of the things that we did slightly different this year was actually take a look at both the towns and the schools' strategic goals, the initiatives that they're thinking of investing in over the next 3 to 5 years. We also asked them to develop 5-year spending projections, again, to give the FinCom and the public a sense of where they think what their spending side of the equation looks like, given those strategic goals as well. We also updated our SGR to give a sense of what's the impact on taxes at certain levels in terms of cost drivers. And then over the course of several weeks, we met with both the town and the schools. Minuteman reviewed their operating budget cost drivers, savings, again, in the context of the overall strategic goals. And based on those discussions and conversations, we issued preliminary guidelines and then updated those with final guidelines in the last week of December. Chris, do we have the next slide? Does it actually contain the numbers? Do you want to?
Yeah, you will in another slide past this, yeah.
Yeah. So as we took a look at fiscal year 23 and kind of what the revenue outlook was, as well as other environmental factors, Carrie LaFleur noted for us that local receipts are still below pre-pandemic levels. I think improved from the prior year, but still less than what we had in 2019, for example. And we also considered whether or not the town and the schools would benefit from the ARPA and ESSER funds for stimulus. And on these, given the uncertainty around many of the programs with respect to guidelines in terms of what they could be used for, when they have to be used for, we were conservative in assuming that the town would benefit. And if in fact we do benefit, and it could be a little bit of icing on the cake, if you will. Taking a look at the economic projections that we typically use, we set an SGR for fiscal year 22 of 2.34%. We noted that the town in particular had reduced capital spending for tier 1 infrastructure the last 2 years. Carrie advised us that it would be wise to begin to reinvest in tier 1 infrastructure. Penny wise, pound foolish, I think is the saying. And so that was a request that we considered as well. And then we also took a look at the cash balance that we do every year. I think many folks here know that we take about $1 million each year and send it back to the citizens, to taxpayers in the form of reduced taxes. And then finally, the other consideration was that we noticed that the regional high school surplus was at the maximum level as well. So we took all of these considerations into account as well when we set the guidelines. Next slide, please. And so based on those considerations, we actually built the guidelines from the bottom up. We took a look at each spending unit, the town, the public schools, and the regional high school, and set our guidelines appropriately. And when you add them all up, if you take a look at the bottom line, the guidelines total spending would increase the combined budgets by about 3.25%, with an impact on median tax bill of 3.37%, and leave the levy limit capacity at 4.21%. This includes the effect of taking $1 million and sending it back to taxpayers in the form of lower taxes. And that's something I think we're going to have to take a look at over the next few weeks and months as more recent revenue projections come in line. With the guidelines that we proposed relative to the initial budgets that the three budget entities came to us with, they currently still exceed the guidelines by about $1.1 million. However, based on the conversations we've had, we're reasonably confident that the town and the schools will be able to reduce that gap further and hopefully be able to eliminate it entirely. Next slide.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about the other warrant article, which is the buildup of stabilization fund. So just a bit of background. So in 2019, at the annual town meeting, they approved the middle school feasibility project and also a $2 million debt stabilization fund. So we started it. So debt stabilization fund is funded through surplus. So this is, we're taking money essentially from free cash. So funds that were appropriated from taxpayers, but were not spent. So that's how free cash builds up. And that pool of funds was used to set aside $2 million for debt stabilization back in 2019. Due to the impact of COVID on town finances, there was no addition to the debt stabilization in 2020 or 2021. So it's still at that $2 million balance. When the building committee came forward with their budget for the new middle school, which is just about over $100 million, FinCom went off and did some work with Carrie LaFleur as the finance director to think about what size debt stabilization fund we would need to do to keep the debt peak, which occurs in FY25 through 28, 29, to take the top off that peak. And we came up with the need for about a $5 million stabilization fund. So there's a gap between the $2 million that we have and the $5 million that we need. In 2021, a few months ago, the Board of Assessors took a look at the overlay surplus fund, which is a reserve that they maintain to deal with assessment claims. And they believe that they could release about $1 million there for stabilization. So if that amount is approved at town meeting, we would be up to $3 million. Next slide. As I said, the source of the debt fund stabilization is free cash. So at this point, we're only over the floor, which is 5% of the operating budget by $1.57 million. As we already discussed, we would like $1 million for property tax reduction, and that would leave only about $570,000 for anything else. We would like to appropriate $500,000 from that balance to add to the middle school stabilization fund, which would bring us to $3.5 million, still with $1.5 million gap to the $5 million that's needed when we hit the peak, which is around FY25. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to keep talking about whether this is appropriate, because we want to make sure we have enough money in free cash that our bond rating would not take a dip. And we need at least 5%. It's probably better at closer to 6%. So this is something we're going to keep talking about. I think that's the end. Chris, what's the next slide? Yeah, that's it. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Chris and Parashar. Next, we will go to the town manager's office, and our interim town manager, Carrie LaFleur, will present.
Good morning, Chris Carmody. Could you also bring up my slide deck? Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the items that I will be covering quickly this morning. The first two are actually not on the agenda, but items that we typically review at this meeting. So I will just give you a very brief update of where we are in terms of our budget and our CIP. Next slide, please. So our fiscal 23 budget process is still very much underway. We are in the process of finalizing the final recommendation. And I'd like to note that it is our intention to meet the fiscal 23 budget guidelines set by the Finance Committee, but we're not quite there yet. Just to give you an idea of what we're hoping to address what we've identified as our key strategic issues in fiscal 23. We've categorized them into 4 different areas. The first is compensation and benefits. We are hoping to do a full classification and compensation study in fiscal 23. Actually hoping to start that in fiscal 22. And we do have some funding set aside, but it is a very lengthy process. But we would hope to be able to complete it by the end of next budget year. The issues here are returning our compensation back on par with our peer communities. We do feel that during the pandemic, we lost some ground, and we'd like to look at that and make that back up. And then we have certain positions, targeted positions that we'd like to look at those individually, areas that we're having probably the hardest time recruiting and retaining employees, to make sure that our compensation and benefits plan is on target with what these people would make in other communities. The second area that we're looking to address is infrastructure, and both Chris and Parashar mentioned this in their presentation. We're looking to restore funding for our tier 1 capital back to our historic levels, which is about $2 million per year. We are under that we are under $1 million in fiscal 22. We're not looking to make all of that ground up in 1 year, but we'd like to get back on track. And then we'd also like to begin the discussion about the tier 1 targets, whether or not they are, what's set in policy is really going to meet the need of replacement of our assets that fall into this category. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little further on the next slide. The next issue is governance. We're looking in the fiscal 23 budget to provide some additional funding to support boards, committees, and task forces. And the fourth item is our welcoming community initiatives. We're looking to begin the discussion about addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, what that means for our organization and the community, and the things that we can do to further those efforts. And we're also looking to continue efforts in funding affordable housing, making sure that people have access to transportation and other supportive services, so residents are able to stay in the community. Next slide. Quick update on our capital and debt plan, our capital improvement planning process. On an annual basis, we prepare a 5-year plan, but we only present the first year for adoption and appropriation at town meeting. The funding targets that we try to meet are based upon the financial policies that the community that we have adopted. For this next year period, the annual targets are between $4.5 and $5.5 million. But for this same period, the requests that have been submitted are between $8.3 and $13 million. So far in excess of what we would spend based upon our policies. We are currently in the process of prioritizing the requests and evaluating other available sources of revenue. And we're particularly looking at ARPA and the federal infrastructure bill. We do expect to have this prioritization process complete this month and in time for the select board focused meeting on ARPA, which is on January 31st. Next slide. The next addresses 2 separate articles related to our OPEB trust fund. These articles, this is the second time we will have these articles, or the second year in a row we will have these separate articles on the town meeting warrant. Prior to this current budget year, the appropriations into the OPEB trust fund were actually included as part of the budget articles. But the best practice and guidance that we have received from the State Department of Revenue is that appropriations into these funds, into the trust fund, should be contained in a separate warrant article. The next article related to OPEB is the expense article. And again, best practice and guidance from the state is that there is one appropriation article and one expense article related to this fund. We did have an expense article on the annual town meeting warrant last year. So we would be, this would be the second time that you would see this. The types of expenses that are included here are the cost of our annual valuation, any fees that we pay for investment services. What is new this year is a specific authorization for the trustee to hire an investment advisor. This fund has a balance of $33.6 million. It is of a size that it should be actively managed. And the state law requirement is that if the town, through its trustee, wants to hire an investment manager, that town meeting must provide specific authorization for that. Next slide, please. The next item is a request for a new revolving fund for the purpose of funding economic vitality and tourism initiatives. The authorization for this type of revolving fund can be found in Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E1/2. This section of state law requires that town meeting authorize the establishment of these funds and then on an annual basis appropriate a budget for these funds. The purpose of this fund would be to collect receipts associated with these activities and to fund program expenses. So the typical receipts that would come into this fund are fees that people pay for tours. So the town offers tours through the visitor center, and those receipts, instead of being placed into, in years past, they had gone into the recreation revolving fund. This year, they're in the general fund. We'd like to set up this new revolving fund to deposit them there and then be able to pay for associated expenses out of the revolving fund. The town currently maintains similar revolving funds, so this is not new for the town. Our existing revolving funds authorized under this section of law include the Senior Services Revolving Fund, Tree Bylaw, the Regional Housing Services Revolving Fund, and a Road Repair Revolving Fund. Next slide, please. The next warrant article that we would like to submit for consideration is the creation of a new trust fund to provide funding for sustainability and electrification projects. This would be a fully expendable trust fund that is eligible to receive qualified charitable distributions. The purpose of it, again, would be to assist in funding sustainability efforts, to assist in accomplishing the climate action and resilience plan goals, and which has 5 different elements, and donations could be made and could be designated to one or more of the element plans, or just in general to meet any sustainability and or electrification projects. As with any trust fund, it would need to have a board of trustees, and we're still working on the declaration of trust document that would delineate the board of trustees and its goals and the overall purpose of the fund. The limitation that is being proposed is that the trust fund would be the minor partner, financial partner in any of these initiatives, that only up to 49% of the cost of any of these efforts could be funded with trust fund monies, and that the town, either directly or through obtaining grants, would be the majority financial partner. So this is, again, to assist in seeing that these sustainability projects come to fruition, but certainly not to supplant 100% of town funding to keep the town on the hook for advancing these goals. And then there would be an annual reporting requirement to the select board. So there would be an annual report made by the Board of Trustees to the select board. So this is somewhat similar to the Sawyer Trust gift that was accepted by town meeting in 2007. But that really was a gift, even though we refer to it as a trust. Here we're looking to set up a trust that is meant to exist in perpetuity. And we do have one or more residents in town who have indicated an interest in contributing to this, and that really was the impetus for this warrant article at this time. Next slide. And this is my last item. And this again is 2 articles relative to the senior means tested tax exemption. The first article would be to accept the special act of the legislature. So I'm sure you all know we are awaiting legislative action on the renewal of our special act to allow the senior means tested tax exemption. And so once that is approved by the state legislature, town meeting would need to accept it. And that's the first article. And the second is in the event that the special act has not been approved by the legislature in time for annual town meeting, the town would still like the opportunity to offer this program in fiscal 23. And so we would need to make an appropriation to cover the cost of the program. This is what we're doing in the current year. And the appropriation, the source of the funds for the appropriation in the current year is overlay surplus, and we would expect it to be overlay surplus in fiscal 23 if that is needed. So that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Carrie. And at this time, we will have the first of several question and answer periods. I want to remind people you can raise your virtual or physical hand. Please state your name and address and keep your questions very brief. So the first person I see is Carlin Reed, and then we'll have Mary Hartman.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. This is a question about the sustainability and electrification trust that's being proposed. How much is the proposed gift that would go into this trust to start it up?
Carrie, you want to answer?
Sure. Carlin, to be perfectly honest, I have not asked donors.
Excuse me, everybody please mute except the people talking. Thank you.
So again, I have been told by the donors of what their intention is, but I have not asked or received specific permission from them to talk about that publicly. So I would prefer to have that permission before that is mentioned publicly.
Then the follow-up is, how do you know it's worth creating this special trust? You need to know the dollar amount. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Mary Hartman and then Matt Johnson.
Thank you, Terry. My name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but I'm speaking for myself. I have a question about the advisor, the investment advisor for the OPEB Trust. I understand that that salary would be paid by the trust, but since the trust is funded through the general fund, it's indirectly funded through the general fund. I think that's correct. So I'm wondering, how is that trust fund managed now? And do we expect that having a separate advisor managing it to be able to earn returns that would pay for that incremental person?
Sure. So all expenses of the trust are paid from the trust, and what is available in the trust are the the annual assessments that are made by the town general fund and enterprise fund plus earnings to date. So the fund, since it was established in 2007, I would say it is passively managed. It's not actively managed. It is invested in accordance with state law, which talks about how trust funds, municipal trust funds, can be invested. And the intent would be that because of the size of the fund, it's important for it to be actively managed in accordance with state law. And I'm not suggesting that it's not managed in accordance with state law, but it is a sizable fund. And the trustee, there is a sole trustee for this trust fund, and that is the town treasurer. And I think it's an awfully large fund to be managed by a single person who is not necessarily required to have significant investment experience.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to Matt Johnson and then Tanya or Mark Galis.
So my question is for Parshar Patel relative to the guidelines process, and it's really just asking what would be the impact, and I guess I could just ask from a ballpark perspective, if we, rather than returning the $1 million to the taxpayers, directed it to other, other objectives that the town has. And I guess that would be sort of relative to the levy limit. Is this would that have a big impact or not on the increase in taxes for the fiscal year, the subsequent fiscal year? And I guess I'd be interested in if there was only $500,000 returned or zero relative to the $1 million that's in the plan.
Yeah, Matt, thank you for the question. I won't characterize whether it's big or not, because that's a relative term, but Carrie, do you have the model in front of you? Maybe you can provide Matt with the numbers of the impact of 500,000 return or $0 return.
Sure, I can do that. So if we were to reduce that $1 million down to $500,000, the impact to the existing tax base is projected at approximately 3.78%. And if we were to just not use any of the $1 million, the estimated impact would increase to 4.3%.
And just as a reminder, with the $1 million, the increase is as planned. It's
3.37%.
Thank you. Okay, so it's about roughly a 0.5% increase in the overall increase. It's a 0.4 point increase. Yes, thanks.
Okay, good question. Thank you. Next, we will go to Tanya or Mark Galis. Please state who you are and your address.
Good morning, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. My question is that about the natural preservation aspect of the climate change and sustainability resilience plan. I am hoping that some of the funds could be used to encourage developers to protect trees and other natural elements in development plans, and in other words, to give as much attention to that aspect as the electrification and alternative energy alternative energy plans. So is that expected to be the case, or has there been any discussion about that?
Who would like to take that question?
I'm happy to address that. I would say we are still at the very beginning stages of nailing down what the specific purpose would be. So we certainly can take that into account, but I can't say at this time that is something that would be addressed through the creation of this trust fund.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. I see Stefan Bader and then Henry Dane. Go ahead, Stefan.
Briefly, Stefan Bader, 7 River Street. I noticed the absence of an appropriation for $500,000 for affordable housing, which the town has done from free cash for the last 3 years. And while I understand that the current budget projections don't show that there's enough money to do that, I would request that the select board or the finance committee consider at least putting the warrant article, putting a warrant article to that effect in as a placeholder in the unlikely but hopefully positive change of events. Because as I understand things, you can't add it in later if it's not on the warrant. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. That was beautifully said. I would ask everyone to please mute if you are not the speaker. I am actually addressing that today. We are putting such placeholders on, and I'll be talking about that at 10:55 according to this agenda. Yes, we will be putting on that placeholder, and your explanation was much better than mine. Thank you. We will go now to Henry Dane.
Thank you. Henry Dane, a member of the select board, but as frequently the case, speaking for myself, I would request that the FinCom consider the impact of taking the proceeds or the potential proceeds of the sale of the Peabody school site into account in determining the amount of the stabilization fund that would be available to reduce the tax impact of that project, in addition to the appropriations that will otherwise be made to achieve that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Okay, seeing no other questions, we are going to move on to the Personnel Board, and we're going to hear from Bill Mrachek, the chair of the Personnel Board. Bill, are you with us?
Bill Mrachek, 64 Rollingwood Lane in Concord. The Personnel Board is currently looking at these 3 items on the bylaw: holidays, vacation leave, and bereavement leave. We'll go into a little bit more detail as I go through this presentation. Chris, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Just to refresh, this particular bylaw is for non-union employees. The focus is on compensation and leave benefits, and there is an approval authority which has provisions for town meeting, personnel board, and the town manager. Let's first of all look at the holiday leave. Chris, can you go to the next, please? So under Massachusetts law, it's already been determined that offices will be closed on Juneteenth. However, the Personnel Board bylaw determines whether or not employees will receive any paid leave for that particular day. And the Personnel Board is looking to recommend that Concord provide paid leave to regular status employees for this date. We're also looking at proposing language updates that reference the Indigenous Peoples Day and also replacing gender-specific terms with neutral terms. Okay, we go to the next one, which is the vacation leave. The current law states that no vacation time may be taken until an employee has completed 6 months. In examining this particular restriction, it is felt that this is not necessary, that the Personnel Board has not identified value in maintaining this restriction and anticipates making a proposal to strike it. The Personnel Board also anticipates proposing gender-neutral language substitutions in this section. We'll go to the next one, which is bereavement leave. Currently, the bylaw provides up to 3 days paid leave when due to the death of the immediate family member. And we're looking at proposing to increase this limit to 5 days and remove the word immediate when referring to family and add reference to household members. Such a change in the bylaw would allow adoption of a policy that provides longer leave for some relationships, such as spouse or child, and grant some leave for relationships that not currently covered, such as a child-in-law, sibling-in-law. And the Personnel Board believes that this is going to be a reasonable approach to bereavement leave that is consistent with other employers and recognizes the needs of employees. Next slide. Currently, as I think everyone knows, there's a personnel task force which is examining the future role of the Personnel Board. And so therefore, this particular group will be submitting recommendations, not however for the town meeting scheduled in 2022. But I just wanted to note that the Personnel Board may have additional proposals in the nature of those that have been presented today for submission, but we do not, that will be determined as we get closer to at the end of the warrant period. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Bill. We will move now to the Community Preservation Committee. Diane Proctor is the CPC chair.
Thank you, Terry, very much. Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. My report will be brief. We have over $2 million in funds to donate and contribute to 11 different projects that have been presented to our board. If we were to at this moment fund them in whole, we would be $40,600 shy of that goal. So we have some further deliberations. However, it is important to note that many of the people who presented projects, in particular, Marcia Rasmussen, have generously reduced funding here and there requests in order to make this gap smaller than it otherwise would be. Those deliberations will be completed on, we hope they're going to be completed on January 18th at our 7 o'clock meeting. People are certainly welcome to join us for that meeting where we make the final deliberations to present our warrant. I'm happy to take any specific questions at the right time, Terry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Diane. We will now move to Melissa Sawfield, Historical Commission Chair.
Thank you. And I actually will defer to Elizabeth Hughes, who will be actually presenting this for the Historical Commission.
Okay, welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So the Historical Commission is looking to place on the warrant a proposed article for a scenic roads bylaw. They have had conversations with town staff, the planning board, and have moved forward utilizing the different plans and documents that the town has referenced as far as the historical character and the need to maintain the historic character of our roads. Documents such as the 2005 Comprehensive Long-Range Plan. There's been road committee studies, the recent Envision Concord plan. The scenic roads bylaw will just be to adopt the state statute, and there are 9 roads that are currently being considered. The Historical Commission has a very active group of historians that have been doing significant research on each one of those roads. That draft research documents are now posted to a new Scenic Roads Bylaw web page under the Historical Commission. It also includes an interactive map, thanks to the town's GIS analyst, Jill Moonheron, where you can actually zoom in and you can see the individual parcels, properties that have frontage on these proposed 9 roads. There's also a link to the Mass Historical Commission has I think it's, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the 1852 map of Concord. She's muted, but that's okay. But I believe it's 1852.
It is 1852.
Yes,
we have
okay.
but some of the roads are actually older, but yes, thank you.
Under the state statute, there is also the ability to assess fines for anyone who violates the Scenic Roads Bylaw. So the warrant article does include an amendment to the town's non-criminal disposition bylaw to reference Scenic Roads Bylaw, should it pass. Should the bylaw pass town meeting, the planning board would be the board that has jurisdiction over anybody who wants to remove or destroy a stone wall or remove a tree within the road right-of-way. Those are the only triggers of the Scenic Road Bylaw. If somebody's doing something else and it doesn't require the removal or destruction of a stone wall or the removal of trees, then the bylaw does not apply to that project. So the planning board under state statute is the board who has the jurisdiction to review those projects. It does require a public hearing and coordination with the town's tree warden under the public shade tree bylaw. Should the warrant article pass, the planning board will be working with Public Works and the Historical Commission to develop Scenic Road Bylaw rules and regulations that will provide guidance to applicants on what's required, how to apply, and guidance on how to move forward with an application. Anything else, Melissa?
Well, the only thing, perhaps just to mention the 9 roads that are under consideration, because they really represent all around Concord. Balls Hill Road, Barrett's Mill Road, Garfield Road, Liberty Street, Monument Street, Old Road to 9 Acre Corner, Strawberry Hill Road, Sudbury Road, and Westford Road.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now turn to the planning board articles, and we will hear again from Elizabeth Hughes.
Thank you. The planning board currently has 3 proposed warrant articles that they are going to move forward with, and a 4th potential one they haven't decided upon. The first warrant article is the amendment to the Thoreau Depot Business District zoning. This has been a project that the board has been working on for over 2 years, and finally is culminating into a number of bylaw amendments to the Thoreau Depot Business District. Specifically, one of the largest changes to that is to the combined business residence section to allow more flexibility to have redevelopment and mixed use near the Thoreau Depot train station. It's a fairly in-depth and complicated bylaw amendment, such as zoning bylaw amendments usually are. And the reason this project has taken over 2 years to analyze, research, worked with the planners, regional planners at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, had public forums. So there is a dedicated Thoreau Depot Business District webpage as well from the planning board's webpage that has all historical documents and information along with the current draft of the bylaw. The two other bylaw amendments, the board is getting input from town council on providing a grandfathered provision for the additional dwelling units. Prior to September of 2020, when the town meeting accepted a complete overhaul of the criteria for an additional dwelling unit. The additional dwelling unit provision was first adopted in 1974. And there's four criteria, previous criteria that are in conflict with the new criteria that was adopted. One of the most significant is previously special permits that were issued. Those special permits for an additional dwelling unit expired upon the sale of the property. So the planning board is looking to adopt a grandfathered provision for those special permits that were granted. There are approximately 52 special permits granted before the amendment in 2020. So the provision would grandfather those units if the special permit was recorded. Some of the other items, currently now there's a limitation on the square footage, 750 square feet by right, up to 1,000 square feet by special permit. Previously, the square footage of a unit was based on the size of the existing single family dwelling. So there are some units out there that might be 1,100 square feet. So there's really no way, if somebody wants to retain that unit and sell the property and somebody buys it and wants to keep it, you can't really go in and start reducing the size of a dwelling. So there's four criteria that the bylaw amendment would make exempt grandfathered for those previous special permits. And then the last bylaw amendment is the town currently has a formula business bylaw, which limits the number of formula businesses in the Concord Center Business District, the West Concord Village and West Concord Business District. The planning board is proposing a warrant article to include the Thoreau Depot Business District in the formula business bylaw. The fourth amendment that the board has not decided upon is a slight amendment to the floor area ratio bylaw to address an issue that has come up where the floor area ratio calculation is based on gross square feet. And in the zoning bylaw, the definition of gross floor area is any area that has a ceiling height of 6'8" or greater. There have been just a few cases. The building commissioner believes he can only think of 3 cases where a developer has put in a ceiling height of 6'7" in a storage room or a large walk-in closet, so that area would not be included in the FAR calculation. Still working with the building commissioner on how that might be addressed without having unintended consequences in other aspects of the zoning bylaw. So those are the four potential warrant articles.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And at this time, we will stop for another Q&A period. I remind everybody, please raise your physical or virtual hand. Keep your questions brief and begin by stating your name and address. I see Ned Perry. Go ahead, Ned.
Just getting my computers lined up here. Thank you very much, Ms. Ackerman. Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. I am very pleased that our interim town manager has included a town-wide full classification and compensation study starting in 2022 to be completed in 2023 to bring Concord's compensation back on par with our peer communities. As the personnel board is responsible for our classification compensation issues in Concord, I'm a bit surprised not to see any reference to the full study in the personnel board's comments this morning. My questions to the chair of the Personnel Board are, one, when was the last full classification compensation study done? And two, how far below par is the Concord compensation below our peer communities? Thank you very much.
Bill?
Terry, this is Bill. I think Amy is probably better to address the details of this question.
Amy, go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, Amy Foley, Human Resources Director. So the last study was done over a couple of years period, but around 2007, 2008 in terms of comprehensive study. At that time, it was advised that we use that to continuously update it. And so we've done that. If you were to look at the class and comp plan that existed then compared to the plan now, you will see a good amount of difference. Every single year it's been updated. Every single year we're looking at compensation of other communities. We're looking at positions. There's been a number of changes. So, but we haven't done one where all positions were studied at the same time. In terms of saying where we compare to other communities, I don't know a way to address that for all of the hundreds of positions that we have in there. We use benchmark positions. I think in most cases, it's not our ranges that are falling behind. It's where our employees are at within the ranges. So the salary increases that people have had, particularly in recent years. And yet that's not the case for all. So there are some that more recently, like we've talked about at the personnel board meeting, the line workers, for example, are a group that has the ranges have fallen behind in more recent time. So yeah, I don't have a formula to give you for across the board, but that gives you a general sense.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next question is from Christine Reynolds.
Thank you. This question is for Elizabeth Hughes. Elizabeth, with respect to the scenic roads bylaw, I understand that there could be some restrictions associated with activities along those designated roads. Are there any requirements for maintenance?
There's no restrictions identified under the scenic roads bylaw. It really is if a road's designated as a scenic road and somebody wants to remove trees or remove or destroy a stone wall as a result of any paving. I have the actual. I can bring up the actual language if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm more interested in whether there's an opposite effect, right? So there are things you can't do, or you have to ask permission for, which you just described. But is there anything that you have to do if something is designated as scenic? So is there any particular maintenance that the town would not be required?
No.
Okay.
No, there's no requirement that a property owner or the town do something as a result of being a designated scenic road.
Okay, thank you.
It only applies to the public right-of-way, town-owned land.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have other questions in this section? Don't see any. Okay, we're going to move on to the next section. I will very briefly discuss two potential articles that the select board is considering. As Stefan so eloquently spoke before about the free cash for affordable housing, this is something we've done in the past 3 or 4 years. As you know, we have special legislation that's been pending, but the legislature has not yet passed any of our initiatives. And so we may need to continue to fund affordable housing through other sources such as free cash. And the Municipal Housing Trust is looking carefully at other sources because now we've heard today that free cash is also something that we need to monitor very carefully. We don't want to go below the 5%. The other possible warrant article we're considering is a local option for future ballot initiatives. So under current law, if a town has a ballot vote to override or exempt from Prop 2.5, the ballot question cannot contain any explanatory information. It can only contain the ballot question itself. And there's very rigid wording requirements for that. But if we accept by local option, town meeting can accept Chapter 53, Section 18B, and this will allow us to print alongside the ballot what a yes vote would mean and what a no vote would mean. And if town meeting were to approve this, it would not obviously take effect before the February vote for the middle school, but it would take effect for any future ballot initiatives. So it seems like every time we have a ballot initiative, we wish we had already adopted this. So we may put it on the warrant this year for any potential future ballot initiatives. And at this time, we will move on to Dr. Lori Hunter, Superintendent of the Concord Schools.
Great. Thank you so much. Good to see everyone this morning. Chris, are you going to pull up our slides?
I will. Just give me.
Thank you. So we're here just to go through where we are in the budget process. We are midway through, so we are not finalized. We're bringing a status update more than anything else. The school committee will be talking about both budgets on the 11th, this coming Tuesday, with the expectation that we will have voted both budget numbers by the 25th. We may include another meeting on the 18th in order to accomplish that. So the numbers we're bringing you today are still works in progress, which is not unusual at this preview meeting. So let me give Chris a chance to pull these slides up. Great. And Jared's here too, so we can answer any questions, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations. So currently the Concord Public School budget for FY22 is $41,708,424. I am recommending to the school committee preliminarily a budget of $43,323,170. Right now, that is a delta of $486,848 above the current guideline that was voted by the Finance Committee. So we will continue to talk about that and have a vote by the 25th, as I mentioned. Next slide, Chris. So here is some of the breakdown of where that increase is coming from. And in some cases, it's being offset by decreases. So if you look, you'll be able to see, as always, most of our increases are contractual. And so that is the largest driver in the CPS budget for sure. We are proposing additional positions in special education in order to complete the continuum of intensive special education services that we've started to build out. Those have allowed us to maintain more students in district, which is why there's a decrease of $500,000 in out-of-district programs. We're ready to bring the analysis to the finance and school committees to show how much money that is saving. It definitely is exponential over time. And we also want to be sure we're stressing that that is really important for kids, that they're able to stay in their local communities. Otherwise, there's some decrease in the incentive for retirement that we offered a few years ago. And as that wanes off, those numbers start to come down. And so we are bringing right now a budget increase of 3.87%. And that dialogue will continue, as I said, with the school committee. Could you go to the next slide, Chris? Thank you. We also are have voted actually already a $900,000 capital plan request that will be part of the town manager's allocation, as is typical. Within that request this year, some of the breakout items are boilers at Alcott. We've been really very focused on trying to increase our energy efficiency through boilers and ERUs. So the boilers at Alcott. Otherwise, we're looking at some upgrades at Ripley, some overdue upgrades at Ripley. So this is the first phase of a few phases, focused this coming year, hopefully on the parking lot and sidewalks and some flooring. And the other highlight, of course, is the $100,000 that we have every year proposed for any urgent issues at Peabody and Sanborn. And so we're looking forward to that waning off over the years once the new school is built. All right, why don't you go to the next slide, Chris? I'm going to shift gears to the regional budget. You can see the current recommended budget is $36,644,994. Concord's portion of that is $22,143,565, with a debt assessment of over $3 million, as you see there. That is $436,414 above the Concord Finance Committee guideline. And we will again be reviewing that as we get to the 25th. Next slide. And you can see the breakout here. It's a very level service budget at the high school, essentially. Drivers include contractual increases, of course. We also carry insurance increases. We are maintaining OPEB at a flat rate this year. And as mentioned, we're coming in with some, we took some risks in the budget because we know we can with E&D at maximum. And that was able to help offset some of the increases to special education and the contractual increases. So you can see we came in at an overall operating budget of 2.48%. Go to the next slide. And so this is the breakout after the assessment is applied. And just a reminder, the assessment is applied to the overall budget based on the percentage of students from each community. And so you can see the breakouts there. Without debt, Concord has a 4.77% increase, with debt 3.88. And next slide. And then finally, the capital article that we're talking about right now. This will sound familiar to many of you. The roadway between Walden and Thoreau entrances was never paved as part of the high school building project. It's in fairly dire need of that repair. So we are discussing currently an article to look at repaving, improving the lighting and the accessibility and overall safety of that roadway. So that is still a discussion. We're grateful to the engineering department for all of their support and trying to get us the best cost possible, and for DPW's willingness to potentially go out to bid with us. So more discussion to come on that. The committee has not decided whether they're actually submitting that article yet. And of course, it would also have to go to Carlisle. So that's where we are with our budget work. It's going to be a busy month of January to come in the schools.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hunter. We will now move to Alan Cathcart, Director of Public Works.
Good morning. Okay, Chris, thank you. Just brought the slide deck up. I've been asked to present, Carrie LaFleur requested this presentation to provide the community with an overview of the capital improvements primarily within the right-of-way area. And the reason she was interested in this presentation is apparently, the new team took the instruction from finance and the long-range kind of planning on 5 years to identify the real needs that we've identified over the last couple of years. We have a new town engineer, Steve Dukran, who I believe is listening as we speak. He's helped develop this program, and we thought it was important for the community to understand the order of magnitude of some of these capital improvements that we are looking at. I'm giving you, Chris, if you can zoom in a little bit on this. It's a 5-year window. What I want to focus on primarily is the fact that engineering has identified the various assets within the right-of-way, which generally people think about pavement, and that's really not what we're all about. It's one aspect of a fairly complex system. It includes various things like treatments on the pavement, traffic, signaling and management, parking lots, stormwater improvements, culverts, bridge repairs. And what we've found in the past is that I believe in keeping with guidance and trying to keep costs in a almost manageable or at least digestible form, Public Works is given a 1-year window, but it hasn't been as comprehensive. And what you'll see is, if you look at the line pavement management, for instance, under Tier 2 debt, you're looking at over $3 to $4 million a year that we are identifying as a need to invest just to bring the pavement back to a condition the community expects. Historically, what's happened is we've had other miscellaneous capital improvements, such as the striping, signage, traffic signaling, stormwater, that's been buried and generally without legitimate costs that we see based on the needs in the community. And what happens if we ask for small money, it gets cut, it's even smaller money. It almost appears as if there's not a need. And I think the town needs to understand what the assets are. We understand and appreciate when you look at Envision Concord, it identifies and helps the town focus on some of the things it would like. Public Works generally deals with the things that the community needs. And when we're lucky, we can go to what it would like as well. But we haven't been financed that way over the last few years. And if you go to the next slide, Chris. We have over 108 miles of public roadways. You can see that includes arterials, collectors, local streets, and there's also 25 miles of private ways around town. Go to the next slide, please. You'll see in the past what we would be requesting, or at least allocated, for 21, 22, and where we are with where we're headed with 23 and 24, significantly different. That's why Carrie thought it'd be important to sort of highlight this and go to the next slide. The reason is, and you can sort of reduce the size of this, Chris, just so it gets on the screen. Okay, thank you. What we're looking at is treatments of the roadways, and we're looking at a different approach. We're trying to do more work with the monies that are allocated, and what we're focusing on is a combination of preservation, which is very cost-effective treatments for the pavement itself, and differentiating that from rehabilitation, which is when we are incorporating more comprehensive opportunities, including utility replacements, repairs, prior to work, stormwater investments, under the roadway. And you can see on this table that on the right, on the left side, where you have the condition of the road, we think of it as far as a pavement condition index, a PCI you'll hear. And presently, Concord's PCI, after an assessment townwide this past summer, we're at about 67, and that's on average. And that's in the closer to fair than good. We have a goal to get all of Concord's roads to a good condition. If we do preservation techniques, if you look at that trend where you go over time, you'll see the condition of a road is generally measured over 20, 25 years, where it will deteriorate to the point of complete failure. If we invest when the road is in fair condition or good, we can improve that experience, at least driving and transportation. If we fail to do the lower cost preservation, or we need to incorporate utility work, we get into much more costly rehabilitation efforts. Engineering is looking at new techniques to try and make the dollar go further on the preservation side, but we also understand there's a balance in needs to look at some of the underground infrastructure as well. If you go to the next slide, you'll see when we talk about more of a rehabilitation strategy, it's more comprehensive. This is where these projects tend to be multi-year in design and construction. We're showing, at least what we had shown on our presentation, is for the most part the infrastructure that general fund would support, but we're not including the cost for municipal light. If they were to put underground in, water or sewer, those would be in addition to the costs that we're talking about. So when we do utility work and more comprehensive rehabilitation, they're very expensive undertakings. If you go to the next slide, this is a intended, it's a comparison of the red slope is where we would allow a road to deteriorate without any treatment, and it would go from a very good condition to a very poor condition in 20 to 30 years. Generally, at the 25-year period or so on average, that's when we would be required to do a very expensive rehabilitation. If you look at the green trend, hopefully you can see the color, those are over shorter periods of time investing smaller dollars into maintaining a condition of the roadway that's superior. The experience for the resident customer is much better. We're starting to look at that as sort of an alternative to the approach of just letting the road deteriorate completely. And there's a number of new techniques that the engineering division has started to explore. They're being used in some communities around us. They are new. We expect that the level of investment may be similar to what we're presenting on the 5-year plan, but we think the condition of the roads on average is going to be significantly improved with a goal of getting up to 80 or better on the PCI. But we know it's going to cost money. We want to make sure that what we do is it's your system. This isn't for an improvement. The funds we're talking about, if you go to the next slide, Chris, these funds are not for a new public works facility, a Taj Mahal of any kind. This is for the infrastructure out in the right of way. And we hear from residents, we hear and read through Envision Concord that these are interests. And our goal is to at least let the community know what the order of magnitude of these investments will be. And if you look sort of at the tally, we're up at $20 million for pavement improvements alone. That doesn't include the sidewalks. That doesn't include the stormwater system. If you look at the total tally, it's about $35 million. We understand this doesn't fit into the guidelines from the finance department at this, or the finance committee at this point, but we do think the community needs to understand what the order of magnitude of investments should be. And our interest is to spend the money wisely, judiciously, look at techniques and practices that will be efficient, but we really are driven by the resources that we're given through the funding and town meeting to meet the needs and interests of the community. So this is a overview, and I will just leave it at that as far as to answer questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Alan. At this time, we will go to the citizen petition articles. We will be hearing from 5 different petitioners. First, Ron Lamoth, then Phil Posner, then Joseph Stein, then Beverly Ridepath, and then Kate Kavanaugh. So Ron Lamoth, are you with us?
Terry, I don't see that he's on, which might just be the agenda said he was going to be on at 11:25. So I sent him an email, but I've been working with this property owner and have, if you don't mind, I have no problem just presenting very quickly what the citizens petition is.
Okay, I'll tell you what, Elizabeth, let's give him a few more minutes. Let's go through the other petition articles. And if he's still not here, we definitely would like to hear from you. Thank you. Is Phil Posner here?
I am, Madam Chair.
All right, go ahead, Phil.
I slides. Would ask Chris to put the slides up. Not seeing them come up. So let me just start speaking and Chris will work on bringing the slides up. Okay, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Philip Posner. I live at 223 Losbrook Road. I'm a member of the Transportation Committee, but I'm speaking on my own behalf with respect to the citizens petition. Concord has a wonderful resource that we have called the Reformatory Branch Trail, which runs along the former B&M Railroad right-of-way from the Bedford Town Line to Concord Center. The Reformatory Branch is currently used by walkers, bicyclists, probably skiers today, on a nice day like today, and others for recreation, refreshment, and as a means of non-carbon emitting transportation from Bedford to Concord Center. And of course, it's also adjacent to the Fish and Wildlife Service Natural Wildlife Refuge. Can you turn to the next slide, Chris? Hopefully everybody can see this. A recap of this is that the proposal would, if enacted, begin a public process in which all the stakeholders, including all of the town residents, the abutters, the federal government through its Fish and Wildlife Service, if they choose to do it, people who have an interest in the wildlife, as well as our town staff, may have a fact-based facilitated inquiry regarding the trail. I've made a number of inquiries with various folks to try to craft a proposal that would free the town staff from feeling as if they needed to run this undertaking. So it says very specifically that there's a sufficient amount of money to hire a consultant who would be designated by the town manager to run this process. Among the reasons to begin this multi-year, multi-step process is that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is going to begin construction of an extension of the Minuteman Bikeway from Bedford Depot to approximately 200 feet past Route 62 in Bedford, heading towards Concord. That will bring more folks towards Concord along a rail trail. I believe that given the very lengthy process it takes to consider doing something in town, it's an appropriate time to begin. This next slide shows you where the Reformatory Branch exists, and you can see that it runs roughly parallel to Route 62 from Bedford to Concord Center. And the proposal would not go beyond either Monument Street or Lowell Street, depending on what folks decide to do. Can you turn to the next step? I want to say thank you to whoever composed the material for the very nice trail guide that is distributed by the Natural Resources Commission. Most of this text is actually composed by them. I've edited it a little bit, but what folks may want to be clear about is that the Reformatory Branch is a former railroad line, which was run from Cambridge, eventually running out to what is now MCI Concord. That railroad line ran both passengers and freight out to the Concord Reformatory until the 1920s, at which time service was curtailed back to Concord Center at what is now the building that is used by, amongst other agencies, the Planning Department, Natural Resources Commission, and others. That building used to be a power plant. which was powered by coal, which was brought by this railroad. That railroad was decommissioned in 1962, and there's some great history around that particular railroad and railroads across the Commonwealth that comes up when you do research on this. Today, the Reformatory Branch Trail provides safe access for folks who are not driving cars to Concord's most significant recreational, wildlife habitat, and other historic resources. Can you continue? And let's look at the next slide too. So why do something? We've had several conversations in various public forums about whether or not it makes sense to move forward with a feasibility study. And in the view of myself and others who will be signing this petition, the current condition of the trail is muddy, poorly drained in various places. There are trees and metal hatches in the trail bed. It's simply not safe and accessible for many people. And some upgrade and change, I believe, is appropriate. Can you change to the next slide, please? The photographs that you're seeing were taken within the last few weeks, and they give you an idea of what the current conditions of the trail are like. So on the left, you can see a metal post and deteriorated pavement. That's Treatment Plant Road that's crossing the trail at that point in time. To the right, you can see where trees have grown up right into the middle of the path, making the trail fairly narrow for someone riding a bicycle or trying to get by using some alternative mobility means, a wheelchair, a powered wheelchair, or other means of access. Can you take the next slide, please? This shot was taken along the trail again within the last couple of weeks. It's a little hard to tell, but this is a not flat grade. It's a fairly shallow grade, and you can see that the trail conditions get pretty muddy after a rainstorm. Next slide, please. In addition to the muddy conditions, on various parts of the trail, hatches are right in the middle of the trail. They're hazardous to someone who is walking by who might not see them. You can see to the left side of the center picture and the left side of the picture on the right, there's a little informal swale that's been created to catch water. One of the most basic things about having a safe trail is that it needs to be crowned and designed so that water flows off to the side of the trail in a reasonably safe and well-engineered way. This is an informal approach to doing it. Next slide, please. Among the things that this proposal recognizes is that improvements of places like the Reformatory Branch are consistent with Concord's climate action goals. We are trying to get cars off of the road. We are trying to encourage folks to use what is in the current parlance, active transportation to get from place to place. The RBT provides a means of access to Concord Center by foot, by bike, and in other means that are not with automobiles. Improving the grading and the drainage can be accomplished without paving. That's been one of the more controversial and concerning issues for folks. Wildlife habitat can not only be protected by doing some improvements, but can actually be enhanced. I've had conversations with many people who are concerned about the impact of a trail improvement on the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service property. And as a matter of the way these things go, the interests of those stakeholders have to be considered whenever a trail is improved. So 2 points. The trail does not have to be paved, doesn't have to be asphalt in order to receive federal and state funding. That's the current policy. And wildlife protection can not only be continued, but most likely would be enhanced, just like it is when any project that's approved by the Commonwealth is undertaken. Next slide, please. I want to reiterate that we're not in a situation where things have been the way they've always been. Two major things have changed in the last 25 years since the last bicycling study was done in 1995. The first is that the Minuteman Bikeway is not only existing, but it's going to be extended past Route 62 towards Concord. The second is that we are living in an era where climate change is on everybody's lips. It's not just about traffic. It's not just about pollution. It's about new ways of thinking. My hope is that the town will agree to start the process, to have a study, and to consider the various options and issues that come up when a proposal like this is made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. We turn now to Joseph Stein. And it's always nice to be running early, but we may not have everybody with us that we need. Is Joseph here? Let's go to Beverly Ride Path, and we can go back to Joseph.
Yes, I'm here. My name does need to be corrected to Beverly Bryant. That's the name I'm registered to vote under.
Thank you.
Yes, we're petitioning another article this year. It's a 5-year moratorium on the installation of synthetic turf on town land, to see if the town will adopt a moratorium on the construction or installation of any synthetic turf defined as monofilament carpet with loose infill on any land of any size owned by the town for a 5-year time period starting on May the 1st, 2022 and ending on May the 1st, 2027, or to take any other action relative thereto. For the last 6 years, the town has supported a moratorium on the use of synthetic turf on town land in Concord. I am petitioning for the town to extend this moratorium with some changes for the following reasons. We still lack scientific information on the health risks to children from the toxic chemicals that make up these fields. In 2016, the US EPA, together with the CDC and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, initiated a study on the health and environmental effects of crumb rubber in synthetic turf fields. An initial report from 2019 outlined the action plan for this research, but to date, no results have been published. The infill of modern synthetic turf can be crumb rubber, but it also may consist of small plastic beads or treated wooden pellets called Brock film. When it rains and snows, chemicals and infill are washed out of these fields and ultimately end up in woodland, waterways, and wells. The carpet is still made with plastic filaments that break down into microplastics over time and are then released into the environment. There is increasing concern about damage done by plastics in our environment. As microplastics flow downstream, they pollute our waterways and the ocean, enter the food chain, put wildlife and humans at risk. Plastics used in synthetic turf have been found to contain PFAS chemicals, which have also been detected in Brock film. PFAS chemicals create serious health risks, including birth defects. They are now regulated by the state in drinking water, although only 6 PFAS substances out of thousands can be tested for. In 2021, a regulated PFAS in the Hugh Cargill well were around half the state's limit. The addition of more synthetic turf in our town threatens to further contaminate our water supply. The climate emergency is now urgent to address. Synthetic turf contributes to climate change by the removal of soil, which scientists tell us is critical for carbon capture, and by the loss of the ability of these fields to photosynthesize and support biodiversity. The cost of installation and disposal of these fields have increased. Disposal costs run at about $300,000 to $400,000 per field, so the total cost of disposing of an old field and installing a new one would be about $700,000 to $800,000. These fields are not recycled at the end of their lives. They last about 10 to 12 years and then are disposed of in a landfill. Finally, the installation of synthetic turf contradicts the sustainability principles adopted by the town in 2011, which include reduced dependence upon synthetic chemicals and other manufactured substances, and reduce encroachment upon nature while meeting human needs fairly and efficiently. There are readily available, cost-effective alternatives to synthetic turf in the form of organically managed grass. In conclusion, the health and environmental impacts of these fields have not been reduced by these new materials. As we learn more about the chemicals involved and our ability to manage them, the risks would appear to be higher. Therefore, we are petitioning for an extension to our previous moratoria and are including in that extension any new types of infill, as well as the plastic carpet. This extension will be for 5 years to allow the EPA to finish their investigation of these products and publish their report, and for research into these new fills and chemicals to be undertaken. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Beverly. And we will turn now to Kate Kavanaugh. Kate, you are on mute. Kate, you are, there you go.
Hi, yes, sorry for the delay. Firstly, thank you all so very much for allowing me to just hop in at the very end here. I know it was last minute and I've never done this before, so luckily I see a lot of familiar faces and names. So I'm here today to talk about ranked choice voting. And if I could share the screen for a moment, I'd just like to share a few words with you about it. I just threw this on at the last minute, so let me just go back. And here we go. I know you're all quite familiar with ranked choice voting. And as a matter of fact, one of the very cool things about, why can I not get this presenting right now? Present to a meeting. Well, I'm afraid I can't present it the way I want it to, but I'll show it to you anyway. Bringing ranked choice voting to Concord. I'm hoping we can do that in 2022 and 2023. How did we get here? Y'all know that in 2020, we had the vote yes on question 2. Unfortunately, it came down to 45.22% yeses and 54.78 noes. Heartbroken and stunned, so many of us were. Interestingly enough, 2 states did adopt RCV, and you'll never guess who they are: Maine and Alaska. Not Massachusetts, but Maine and Alaska. So anyway, we can't have it on the ballot for another 6 years after the loss, but in the meantime, we can go municipal. And who's doing that in Massachusetts? Well, we've got a lot of cities that are working on that: Boston, Somerville, Arlington, Newton, Northampton, Holyoke, Salem, and New Bedford. Towns: Amherst is already on their way, Acton and Wellesley. And the cities of Cambridge and East Hampton are already using RCV. And their voters adapted quickly and easily because they're really familiar with the concept of prioritizing their choices. How about Concord? In 2020, we had 34 Concordians who volunteered to fan out across town to gather signatures. I'm sure some people on today's call were some of those 34. And of the 19,000 residents in Concord, almost 12,000 voted, and 61.4% said they wanted it. So 2/3 of Concordians voted to have RCV on a statewide basis before. Also, side note is that many towns or municipalities in the state have old voting machinery called AccuVote that in order to do RCV, they need to replace them. They need to replace it anyway because they are old equipment and they are not particularly secure or maintainable. But anyway, we have ImageCast. So we're already positioned to do our CV, which is great. So in terms of RCV is a bipartisan move. It's not Democratic or Republican, and it's familiar. And we use RCV all the time. You know, before people were saying it's too complex. It's really not complex. When a family discusses buying a car, they consider first, second, third choices. When you're doing fantasy sports, you do a draft board ranking your people. When you decide where to go to eat or what toppings to put on your pizza. Concord voters well understand how ranked choice works, and I don't think it'd be a problem communicating it. And if we do it, Concord will realize the benefits of RCV, which is heightened civility among candidates, nowhere near the kind of mudslinging, encouraging new citizens to run for office, therefore increasing diversity, electing officials who represent the will of the majority of citizens. And it also streamlines the process. All choices are collected at the same time. So I propose that we have a warrant article, and this is one that was used by Arlington, can certainly modify that. And again, would love your help because I've never done anything like this before, but I really think that it is something that Concord would get behind if it was proposed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. And we will go back now to Virginia Road zoning boundary amendment. Is Ron here, or should Elizabeth, if not, you can jump in.
Thank you. I don't see him in the list, so I'll make this brief. Chris, if you can just bring up the maps, that would be great. This property at 477 Virginia Road is almost to the towards the end of Virginia Road, right before Middlesex Green. It's the little teeny house on the north side of the road. I don't know if Chris, you can point to it. Keep going, right. Yep, up there, the little teeny house. This house is currently included in the Industrial Park B zoning district. The property owners purchased this lot where the house sits and the lot behind it. The house is a historic house. I think it's 16 something, but it was used for an office for a period of time, but the new owners have completely renovated it and returned it to residential use. And what that does, though, is because it's in the Industrial Park B zoning district, it is actually considered a legally non-conforming use. Anything the property owners wish to do would require a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. If you can scroll down a little bit more, Chris. What the property owner would like to do is to amend the boundary between the Residence A zone district, which is the solid color, and the Industrial Park B zone district, to have the house and a majority of the property that they own behind it put into Residence A so that the house becomes a legally conforming use on the lot. And that's the basics right there.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for stepping in there. And do we have Joseph Stein with us? We are running very early, which is wonderful. This is one downside of it. Why don't we move now to the next question and answer period, and we'll see if Mr. Stein comes on at the end of that. So if anyone has any questions and answers on that last section, I see 2 questions so far. Please raise your physical or virtual hand, state your name and address, and be very brief. We will start with Dr. Lori Hunter and then Mary Hartman.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make a clarification. We need to update the regional guideline from the finance committee, they generously increased that to another 250,000. So we are about 240,000 overall, 180,000 delta here in Concord. So I just want to be sure we reflected the final guideline and not the preliminary guideline. So again, thank you for that. And we'll be having more discussion.
Thank you for that clarification. Next, I think I saw Mary Hartman.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I have a question about the feasibility study for the Reformatory Branch Trail. I'm glad that this is coming out because I think it's time to have a good conversation across town. But I have two questions. I'm wondering, where does the Trails Committee stand on this? Because after all, it is a trail that people use for passive recreation, walking and enjoying the wildlife. So I'd like to see the Trails Committee come out and with some kind of participate in this conversation more actively. And then my other question is, as far as how is it being funded? I'm a little bit unclear. Is this in the FY23 budget, or how is this $75,000? What's the proposal for how this will actually be funded? So those are my questions.
So before we get an answer from Phil, let me just clarify that today's meeting is an overview of these articles. And yes, the Trails Committee should weigh in, as should several other committees like the Transportation Committee. And we will be having public hearings on all of these articles in February and March with ample opportunity for more detail and citizen debate. So Phil, do you want to answer about the source of the funding?
So according to the text of the proposed warrant article, the town meeting would be authorized to either raise the money through an appropriation in the tax levy by the transfer from available funds or borrowing or any other combination of methods. I do know that there are various funds that have already been appropriated for similar matters, but you know, that I was encouraged to draft the language so that it would be flexible.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'll be discussing this a lot more. Next person is Stefan Bader, and then Linda Escobedo.
Stefan Bader, 7 River Street. Again, quick question for Alan Cathcart in the Public Works look towards the future. There was a $450,000 item for traffic signals in FY24. And my brief question is, where is that, or is that townwide? I know we have new signals at Main and Thoreau and Sudbury. Is this for upgrading existing signals or proposed new signals somewhere? And I know that's not subject to this year's town meeting, but I was curious.
Yeah, I believe this is Steve Dukran. If you're listening, correct if I'm wrong. This might be for the Baker Avenue intersection. Is that correct, Steve Dukran?
That's correct, Alan. Primarily for that Baker and Main intersection, as well as some upgrades to the Fitchburg Sudbury Road intersection, where the signals have, you know, some of the equipment is obsolete.
Thank you.
Okay, next we will go to Linda Escobedo and then Tanya Galis.
Thank you. And this is also for Alan Cathcart and his staff. Thank you very much for giving us the presentation to sort of expand our understanding of what's involved with all the road maintenance and development. I guess my question here is if you could say a little bit more about the impact on the FY23 budget, as well as I assume you're looking and preparing for ARPA and infrastructure funds.
Yeah, Linda, thank you. Excellent question. In fact, part of what we're trying to do is identify the needs. And, we know from experience, for instance, something like the Monument Street culvert, failure recently, where in an emergency response, there was a $650,000 need that hadn't been planned. Engineering is going through a needs assessment of all our culverts, as we speak. But the proposal for 23 and really the 5-year plan does dovetail and inform potentially federal funding needs if available. And I know there's great hope and expectation that money is going to fall from the sky and all the transportation and infrastructure needs are going to be addressed. But this does position Concord to at least put its case forward, as far as identified with existing infrastructure. The 23 ask is simply that. We don't know yet, as Carrie had mentioned, what we're going to be afforded. So what we do is we have a plan that will be curtailed depending on the money that's available. And so you can see with our roads program, if we don't have the full funds, we'll just have to pull back on the scope of work. Some of these things, though, are multi-year initiatives. So if the funding is light this year and it can be reinforced in 24, that's great. If it can be supplemented with infrastructure funding, that'd be great. But we can't plan on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. We will go now to Tanya Galis and then Ellen Quackenbush.
Can't do this. Okay, hi. Yeah, and Mark is here too, in case he may want to add a comment or a question. So my comments and questions are about the Reformatory Branch Trail. One is that I would encourage everyone and anyone listening to go walk the trail, because you get a lot of information by just seeing it and walking it. As Mr. Posner pointed out, it is indeed multi-use. Cyclists already use it. Many cyclists who use it for multiple purposes, recreational or commuting, do not want anything done to it. Some may mention some minor drainage issues. Another point is that Bedford has not secured funding to pave to the Concord line. In fact, they probably depend on us to have this discussion and do feasibility studies in order to secure that funding. There is a video from the Bedford Bicycling Committee's November 4th, 2020 discussion where Mr. Posner, as well as the co-chairs of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee, who initiated a discussion about paving this trail back in October 2020, and Mr. Bill Robichaud of the Trails Stewards have been coordinating efforts with the Bedford paving interest in order to eventually, step by step, by coaxing the public to have this paved. The climate action view, as Ms. Bryant pointed out in her comments about her article, include reduced encroachment upon nature. So given that this trail is already multi-use, I think we should keep that in mind and not disturb an already existing multi-use trail where any kind of altering of the surface into hard surfacing, hard paving, or other hard surfacing is going to, in fact, take it away from the recreational users and the pedestrians in effect. My understanding is that there was at least one discussion with the Fisheries and Wildlife Service representative about the endangered species there, Blanding's turtle and Britain's violet, among others, and that their view was that they don't want anything changed on the trail. So I do not think there is going to be any help to wildlife by doing anything to this trail.
Tanya?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Okay, and we are running early, so please. Okay. The other thing is that I have attended as state feasibility studies funding meeting for trails. And I know that while there are feasibility studies of the kind that Mr. Posner is talking about, they have said it would in the end favor hard surfacing. There are conservation grants for conservation trails where minimal improvements would help with drainage. And this is something that could be applied for. So my question to Mr. Posner then would be, why not apply for a conservation grant that will maintain this trail a little better? And instead of encouraging and helping Bedford to finish paving their portion, to keep this trail natural. It's a short trail. It is very usable by bicycles right now. There is no need to do anything to it other than possible small minor drainage improvements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's let Mr. Posner give a brief answer and then we'll move on.
Yes, I want to.
Okay, Mike wants to.
All right, very briefly, and then we need to move on.
I think that this is Phil Posner, 223 Lawsbrook Road. I guess in responding, I think the purpose of having a feasibility study is to have an informed and fact-based review of the current conditions in the field, to have various experts provide information to the public and allow the public to make decisions based on what's presented to them.
Okay, thank you. Mark, do you have a brief question?
I do. I can wait till Ellen speaks or right now, whatever you think.
Well, go ahead. Let's stay on this topic.
Okay, two things quick. One is I very much applaud Superintendent Cathcart's frank statement that we should really not sweep under the rug the ultimate negative financial impact of delaying maintenance on our infrastructure. I think there's too much even on the state level helping towns add infrastructure and not maintain what they already have. So I think that is extremely important. Secondarily, with regard to the Reformatory Branch Trail, I don't think anything major needs to be done. $75,000 could be spent on doing minor drainage improvements or working with the state conservation and recreation to do the work. If you hire, and this is the experience, if you look through the history in Bedford and other places, if you hire an engineering firm that knows how to make paved bikeways and paved highways and bike lanes in cities and all that, if you hire an engineering firm like that, it's a Trojan horse. You've already started down the slippery slope of widespread tree clearing, denaturization, such as is going to happen in Bedford. If you look at what's happening there, they're going to lose hundreds of trees, a whole natural sense of the trail, et cetera. I think it's a terrible waste of money. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on now to Ellen Quackenbush, followed by Ara Avakian.
Hi, thank you. Actually, Mark kind of asked my question. I think I would ask Phil if he could change the wording of the bylaw to include a discussion of the type of consultant hired. I do agree with Mark that if you hire a civil engineer or drainage consultant, you're going to be, pushed in the direction of changing the surface in some manner. I think that that discussion should be the type of consultant. Hiring a conservation consultant and wildlife expert in endangered species would recognize some of the users that weren't mentioned in the discussion, which is the endangered species. This is not just about people, it's about wildlife preservation. So I would just say, please, can we change the wording of the petition to include a discussion before it's a fact of what type of consultant would be hired? Thanks.
Thank you. Ara Avakian.
Yes, can people hear me okay?
Yes.
Ara Avakian, 501 Powder Mill Road. I just want to thank the Public Works Department and especially Mr. Cathcart for a presentation of lots of data, but it was done in such a way that it was clear that low cost, frequent maintenance can end up saving us money in the long run and also making the roads more pleasurable to drive on. So I understand that we are focused on the current, the coming years finances, but I would like to recommend that the select board and the finance committee and so forth keep in mind that there is a danger of false economy and to make their perspectives a longer term when deciding how to spend the town's money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Avakian. And that's such a great segue into, I want to invite everyone to attend January 31st. The select board will be having a focused meeting on the ARPA and infrastructure funding that we will be receiving, a once in a lifetime opportunity to try to catch up on many different infrastructure priorities. We need to build a plan or a roadmap for what we're going to spend this money on and how to wisely invest it. So
we have been joined by Joe Stein.
Yes. Let me just see if there are any other questions. Don't see any right now. Let's go to Mr. Stein on his petition article.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I don't have a presentation today, so I'll just go ahead and speak to the article. So what this petition is asking for is really just for the first steps to add a potential charge for all checkout bags in Concord stores. So the Massachusetts state law currently does not allow towns in Massachusetts to directly adopt their own bag charges. So this article is just going to authorize the select board to petition the state for a law requiring Concord retailers to charge a minimum of 10 cents for each checkout bag distributed. This is both paper and reusable bags. This article that I'm presenting today is really just the same exact article that was already passed in Sudbury and Lincoln town meetings last year. And the goal is really just to build on their success. So why is this important? I think there are several reasons. One, a bag charge will incentivize consumers to reuse bags, which is really the most sustainable option in the long run. Studies have shown in California, for example, that with the plastic bag ban and a 10-cent charge on paper bags, it increased reusable bag use from 5% to about 45%. So, a small charge can be quite effective in impacting human behavior. Secondly, it addresses shortcomings with simple bag bans. So Concord currently bans single-use thin film plastic checkout bags, but while this is an important first step, this risks being counterproductive because it just shifts, paper bag use, which has its own problems. So even though paper can be recycled, it doesn't persist in the environment like plastic. It's very energy and water intensive to produce. Third, it gives consumers choice. So if they want or need a bag at checkout, they can pay for one, or they can just save money by bringing their own reusable bag. And studies have shown also that people who get bags for free just generally treat them as disposable, regardless of what they're made of. Fourth, it's good for Concord businesses. It's not a tax. All charges would be retained by the retailer to defray costs of buying additional bags for any other use. Even the Mass Food Association, which represents the grocery stores in the state, testified in support of a statewide bag charge. And then finally, because it would reduce bag demand, will ultimately reduce disposal and recycling costs that are borne by the town, which, just continue to go up every year. So, so just in closing, the checkout bag charge is an idea that's already enacted in many parts of the state, including Boston, Cambridge, Newton, Haverhill, Framingham. It's also statewide in California and Vermont, many European countries. I think it's a triple win. Personally, I think it's a win for the environment, a win for the businesses that we have in town that we want to support, and also a win for consumers. And so with that, I look forward to any potential feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are at the end of this meeting now. Is there any additional public comment? Please raise your hand. Don't see any right now. Let me just check. Okay. Okay, in that case, I think we've heard a very good overview today. Thank you, everybody, for being brief. And thank you, everybody, for spending part of your Saturday with us today. Thanks to Chris Carmody for setting up this whole meeting. If you've missed any portion of the meeting, please feel free to watch it on the town YouTube channel. And we'll also be holding public hearings on all of these articles in February and March. There will be more detail on these articles and ample opportunity for public questions and answers and comments and debate. We will also, as I mentioned, be having the ARPA and Infrastructure Forum on January 31st. We want to hear from many community members on that. Reminder that your warrant articles are due February 2nd at 4 p.m. We look forward to seeing all of you for the special town meeting Thursday, January 20th, and annual town meeting on May 1st. So at this time, we will take a motion to adjourn the select board meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Okay, roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman.
Aye.
Ms. Bates.
Aye.
Mr. Dane.
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo.
Aye.
And myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.